All right, so to shed some light on those reports and the issues raised there, as you've seen, we've got Mr. Clement Wankwa, who is the convener of the Situation Room and the Executive Director, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. Right beside him, we would have Olole Osaze Uzi, who is the Director of Voter Education and Publicity for INEC. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today on the program. Mr. Marco, let me start with you.
Thank you.
Right now, the reports, observations, recommendations, if you will, to a lot of people, this kind of speaks to the foundation when you say it questions the credibility of the exercise, because it was supposed to have been better than 2015, but then this is what we have. Was that the intention?
Well, what we had done, even before elections, was to engage with different stakeholders, INEC, the police, civil society, and different stakeholders working on election issues in the country. And in the course of that engagement, and of course looking through the provisions in the Constitution and Electoral Act, we did develop what we call election threshold, which is a threshold for what would be considered credible elections. And we did outline 8 separate items, which includes the voter, the non-partisanship of security agencies and institutions of state, the integrity of the voters register, the ability of political parties to campaign, the collation process, and several such issues. So in going into the election, and we had very regular consultations and dialogue with INEC, with the police and all the agencies. In going into the elections, we continuously made clear that these are the thresholds on which we would unbiasedly issue our report on the elections. And in measuring the elections, we had to go back to that document that we shared with all of the stakeholders involved. And in ticking off, we were finding that several of the issues that were outlined in that document were measured against what was happening on election day and indeed prior to the elections. And it was on the basis of that we came to the conclusion that the elections did not meet 5 of the criteria set in the threshold document. Out of the 8 criteria indicated. And that's the basis on which that we issued reports to say that there were issues, and based on this, we do not believe that the elections met that threshold of credibility outlined in the threshold document.
Having gone through, I mean, you must have seen, the commission must have seen this document, because some members there making some comments. But how is the commission internalizing this particular report?
Well, is that directed at me?
Yes, Mr. Uzi.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Quite honestly, officially, we have not seen this report. I took the liberty of going online yesterday and to read parts of it, as much of it as I could possibly read. And when you say, how do we internalize this? We have just concluded a series of consultations with our stakeholders, review meetings with our stakeholders, including civil society. And fortunately, the Situation Room was well represented in some of those review meetings. And we're going to look at it. Part of the criteria for registration or accreditation to observe the elections was also that those reports should be submitted to the commission. Ideally, it should have been submitted either as it was being released or shortly before it's released. You share copies with us so that we can study it and internalize it, as you said. We don't take individual reports. We take all the reports together, look at the recommendations, look at the findings of them, and then review them. Take what the international, what the domestic observers have said, what our monitors have said, what the media has said, and then synthesize all this and take them going forward, seeing what we can do. The ones that are administrative, the ones that the commission can deal with by itself, it will deal with them. Those that require legislative intervention or intervention by other stakeholders like security, we have promised and assured that we will engage those stakeholders and see how we can move forward. So obviously, some of those things that have been found that we'll critically examine and change our processes, improve upon them. Those ones we cannot do anything about, we'll engage those stakeholders. But let me just quickly add that I am a bit personal, on a personal level, a bit worried about thresholds being set separate and distinct from thresholds set by law or set by international treaties and conventions. The law has set threshold. And to me, that is the yardstick, that is the litmus test which we have to pass. Once we pass that, I think the issue of credibility will be adjudged by an independent body looking at those thresholds set by law, set by the Nigerian people. The law represents the threshold that the Nigerian people have set for themselves. And that is the yardstick I will use in gauging the credibility or otherwise of any election or any process.
Now, Ms. Uzi, could you be, if you will, a little more specific? What particular threshold do you think negates or, is without the scope of the law in this report?
Well, let me take results transmission, for example, results collation, result process. The law says that the results should be declared at the polling unit level. In some jurisdictions, in some countries, you take the polling materials to a central place and declare. But in our own law, in our own structure, in our legal framework, you declare results at the polling unit, right? Now, there was a conclusion that, that there was some shortfall in that process. Now, INEC went further than what the minimum threshold set by law. Not only does it declare it there, it also publishes it. You will not find that in Constitutional and Electoral Act. It was an initiative of INEC that you'll find in its guidelines. It set higher threshold for itself. But it has met the minimum threshold because it declared these results in all of the polling units. And going for that, it published them. And going to the collation level, it also, not known to the law, publishes the collated results in every collation center. That is what it said. People often say, okay, why don't you transmit this way or that way? That's not what the law says. The law says you go from point A to point B, and we went ahead to go further than that. That is the only threshold I know, and that, I think, was complied with substantially. So that ticking off, I'm afraid that I beg to disagree on that aspect, for example.
Mr. Nwankwo, how do you react to that? There are, thresholds you set that are, maybe not particularly in tandem with the Electoral Act. How do you respond to Mr. Osaze-Ozie?
Well, the Situation Room has worked very closely with INEC. We continue to do so. In the work that we do, we make it very clear that the intendment is that we all work towards building a credible electoral system, building a credible electoral institution, and we've all worked towards building respect for INEC. And in coming up with a threshold document, it wasn't something that someone sat in one room and wrote up some threshold. No. All of this comes from looking at what the law provides, at thresholds that INEC set for itself in the regular dialogue sessions that we had with INEC. The issue of integrity of the voter register, INEC defined it. We captured it in the threshold document. The issue of transmission of results and collation of results, INEC set it. We captured it. The issue of non-partisanship of security agencies, this is within the law. If you look at Section 29 subsection 2 of the Electoral Act, it defines how security agencies, including the military, should get involved in the elections. We agreed with INEC, and INEC made it quite clear that the military, the security, would not be deployed without the directive of INEC. That's what Section 29 subsection 2 said. Looking at what happened on the field, it was quite clear that there was no coordination, no linkage between what the security services, what the military was doing, and what INEC was doing. And we cited specific examples in this report. When you look at all of the thresholds set, it is quite clear that nobody invented these thresholds. These are things that INEC committed to. These are things that are in the Electoral Act. These are things that are in the Constitution. So my sense is that we will continue to work to build people's confidence in INEC. I think that there were challenges with the elections. We've outlined it. We do know that INEC has also acknowledged that there were challenges. I think the question here is the approach in beginning to understand how to work towards redressing these challenges. And we're quite prepared to work with INEC to begin to address these challenges. It is a failure to acknowledge the need for an inclusive work towards addressing these challenges. That is the issue. Nobody has all of the answers, and we can only prefer our suggestions and recommendations on going forward, and that's what we have done in this report. And we believe that INEC would open up to understanding that there are ways in which this can be done that is inclusive, that involves understanding what everybody is saying. Nobody sits down and decides to criticize INEC, least of all the Situation Room, because we have worked wholeheartedly in support of INEC to achieve credible elections. But we feel obligated to our conscience, to truth, to say what has not gone right. And we are not saying it because we want to understate anybody's achievements. We think INEC did quite a lot of work, but we believe that where there are shortcomings, it needs to understand what civil society is saying, what observers are saying, and work towards, in concert with others, redressing the situation. And that's what we're looking forward to doing.
Mr. Nwankwo, one of the recommendations in your report, indicates that INEC and security agencies should ensure accountability for acts inimical to the integrity and credibility of the polls, especially individuals complicit in the burning of INEC offices and all of that. One of the things that INEC has said from time to time is that they have to work with other organizations, other agencies, like organizations that do not have authority over, like security agencies and all of that. Do you think the partnership was effective enough to ensure credible elections?
The electoral system, and this was created by INEC, has an interagency collaboration with security agencies, which it calls ICAS, and under that process, INEC co-chairing with the National Security Advisor are supposed to work to deal with challenges to security around elections. We had said from the beginning that we would like civil society to even observe and contributes to suggestions around the work of that committee. That did not happen, even though it was something that we had suggested with INEC in the room, and a commitment from INEC to look into this request by civil society. We again would make the point that when you look at Section 29, subsection 2 of the Electoral Act, it's very clear that INEC is in charge of security for the elections and gives directive to the security services on what to do. And with respect to specific arms of the security, it made that point. When the new Inspector General of Police, not so new anyway at this time, but when we met with him, we were very impressed with his commitment to pulling back from some of the observations we had about the excesses of the police. And I believe that the new Inspector General of Police did a lot to get the police to become very compliant or nearly compliant with several of the duties that are provided for it under the law. We're not quite sure that this was the case across all of the security services, and that point we made very clear, that you needed to be quite sure that people understand that this is an election to be run by INEC. And I really pity INEC because it is thrown into the situation where it did not have total control of what the security services were doing. And so INEC officials sometimes were left on the field to the challenges of security that was faced. In fact, we did have reports of INEC officials being killed. We did have reports of the INEC offices been burnt in Imo State, in Anambra State. In fact, Anambra State, till today, we have no sense of investigation of what happened when we had several card reader machines that were set on fire. There was no investigation of what happened to that. We have no report on it. So there were challenges with the security system. We think that INEC needs to exercise the powers that are indicated in the Electoral Act that gives it the right to control. And we made the point that if INEC felt that it was not in control of the security environment around the elections, it should have insisted that it cannot proceed under that circumstance. And I think Nigerians, if INEC had said, we are not in control of the security environment around these elections, Nigerians would have said, please, can you get it right so that INEC can carry out its duties? I think that those were some of the challenges that I identified, and we hope that going forward, INEC understands that when observers issue a report, it's not to criticize it, it's to work again towards helping to build an electoral process that we can all be proud of as Nigerians.
Mr. Osaze-Ozie, how do you react to that, the fact that INEC is supposed to be in control of security apparatus for the elections?
Well, Clem is a very experienced lawyer, had many years of practice. But I seem to differ a little bit in the interpretation he has placed on Section 29, subsection 2 of the Electoral Act amended in 2015. Because I think that speaks to deployment of security agencies, not necessarily command and control. The Constitution has spoken to command and control. We all know who the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces is. We all know who the Inspector General and the role the Inspector General and the Armed Forces should play in a given situation when they are dealing with their responsibilities under their purview. But having said that, yes, INEC from Section 29 should have, largely the chairman of INEC should have a say, not just a say, but it's actually in charge in terms of deployment, in terms of needs assessment, and getting the cooperation of the armed forces. I think that's I read it to be the intendment of Section 29, subsection 2 as amended. Look, let's work closely with the chairman of INEC, who should identify areas of need and areas of deployment. And yes, I concede that we work closely with the Situation Room and other civil society organizations. We work as hard as we could closely with the security agencies and other stakeholders. And but I am trying to digest when Clem says that INEC should have cried out and said we cannot proceed with the election and stop the whole election. Well, we did that actually in parts of it. For you recall that in Rivers State, when we saw the security challenge, when we saw that we're losing control of the process, because the security agencies are to secure the process, secure voters, secure lives and properties, but not to interfere in the process itself. The process, the Constitution has given INEC the responsibility for superintending the process, and we are not subject to direction or control of anybody. So when it appeared that the security agencies were crossing that line, we did call out and we did suspend the exercise in real estate and in other areas where security could no longer be guaranteed, where we saw that the security either were playing a role they ought not to be playing or where they could no longer guarantee security. So in Rivers is a case in point. We did call out people, and I think that should have been, that should be acknowledged. But going forward, yes, we will work closely with all these people. We will sit down and discuss those things. And the commission, as a commission, has not sat down to study that report. As I said, we don't have copies of this report. And the precondition is that you give us copies of it, we'll sit down and look at them. We will take everything on board and see how we can collectively improve upon the process.
I'd like us to stay with that improvement or process of improving the process. In about 107 days, we're counted down to elections in Kogi and Bayelsa State, and that's really important. Nigerians are watching to see how INEC will handle this in the light of the 2019 general elections and the challenges that have come up. So I'd like you to briefly walk us through specifics, how the INEC would handle these recommendations. You have said you don't consider them individually, you lump them up and then try to handle them. You have done some internal review also. So please walk us through specifics on how you're handling these recommendations ahead of November elections.
Great. Now, not only in the light of the 2019 elections, but in light of the elections conducted in both states 4 years ago. Recall that both states, the elections ended up being inconclusive. Kogi, for example, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court validated the inclusivity that INEC was correct in dealing with it in the way it did. It validated that point. So we'll look at these things, and there are certain areas, for example, in both states that have been or traditionally been flashpoints or have become flashpoints. So obviously security is a main issue. And we have started that engagement with the higher echelons of the security agencies. One thing we should do, we have tried to map out the early warning system, map out the areas where traditionally there have been conflicts, look at the new sources of potential sources of conflict, and see what conflict management initiatives we can introduce into that. So we're working with the security agencies. That is very important. Logistics, that is within the purview, by and large, of the Commission of INEC. And there was a challenge that led to, partly led to the rescheduling of the 2019 elections. That is of big concern. We don't need anybody to tell us that. We have come up, acknowledged that, and said, look, we will deal with this issue going through. And we know the riverine nature of Bayelsa State, for example. We know that even in Kogi, there are difficult terrain areas. So how do we improve upon the logistics? We sat down with our electoral officers from all over the country, but especially from those states, paying greater attention to those states. As I speak with you, there's a training going on for the public affairs officers from both states.
Okay.
In fact, in the last couple of weeks, on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, officials of the Commission have either been coming to Abuja, or we have been going.
I'm afraid my apologies. I need to jump in because I need to ask both of you this just before we wrap up. Mr. Marco, this election threshold, this report generally, particularly, you did highlight about the collation of results was a major weakness. You said that in that threshold. So doesn't this have to do, because, I mean, yes, we know matters are still ongoing in a tribunal, and one of that is a key factor at that point. Isn't this going to affect proceedings in the court, you think?
No, I think one, collation of results, or indeed all of the recommendations we have made are recommendations. Various observers, like Wale has mentioned, have an obligation to issue reports once they are accredited. And in issuing a report, of course, issue reports that are going to be helpful to the Commission, which is what we're trying to do. We don't want to get into the issues related to the tribunal. As you can see from our report, we have no conversation at all in that report about the outcome of the election. What we have focused on is on the process, and that process made it quite clear that virtually all of the stakeholders, the political parties, INEC, had shortcomings that they needed to work on to improve. When we first began to work on this report, we requested INEC to allow us and give us time to come and present the report to the leadership of INEC. INEC made it quite clear that they were going to be too busy to receive our reports. I volunteered to come personally and hand it over to the leadership of INEC. That was rebuffed, and that report has been delivered to INEC. So if Wale has not seen it, I would give him a copy of that report that I have right here in the studio. But he says he has seen it online, and this report was uploaded even before we launched it online, so it's available online on the Situation Room platform.
All right, well, we're going to do something before we go. Before we do that, Mr. Uzi, just briefly, because we're really out of time, apart from civil society groups having their own reports, I understand INEC is conducting a nationwide appraisal of 2019 elections. So don't you think that that also is going to, given in context of the doctrine of lis pendis, the matters before the tribunal?
No, you see, ours is internal. Lis pendis says you do not comment publicly on any issue that is a live issue in an ongoing petition or in an ongoing case matter. So that's also why we're careful about what we comment on. We don't comment publicly. We've discussed things privately. Even after each session in the tribunals, we sit down, look at the things I've said, start taking notes of issues that we should interrogate further after the conclusion of the cases. So we will not publicly comment, including we will not publicly comment on anything that is a live issue in the tribunal.
Okay, so Mr. Marco, could you please hand him that document then, since he likes to receive it before he goes, just before we go as well. Director, can we just see that?
Right away.
Yeah, please. All right.
But it's available online. It's not a secret report, and it really aims to help INEC to improve on the process. And together with INEC, we are partners in working towards improving our electoral system.
And we also want to do that as well, to improve that and get the country moving forward. That's why we do what we do. So, gentlemen, thank you both, and we wish you all the best. All right, so we're back in a moment. Join us again.